Good morning. I'm Jill Huerta. I'm Executive Director of the Center for Graduate Life and Learning. I actually had to think about that for a minute. It's been a long week. I had to think, who am I? But anyway, I'm so glad you've joined us for this Accelerate to Industry session. As you know, Accelerate to Industry is a program where regional corporations come in and provide you with professional development directly. And it's such a beneficial program because who can better tell you about the skills that you need to build to be competitive in the employment market than employers in the regional market. So it's a wonderful program, and I'm glad you've taken some time on a Friday to work on your professional development. We have here team members from Tresata, who has been a couple time A2i partner now, so welcome back. I've worked with Pat Sellers a couple times, Director of Operations from Trusada, and he has brought team members along today. So without further ado, Pat, I'm going to hand it over to you and your team to introduce yourselves and to kick off your programming. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jill, for that gracious introduction. We're happy to be here. We always find this a really interesting venue to talk about some of the things we do on a regular basis. And our topic today is a good example of that. But before I get into that, I want to introduce my two colleagues. Nancy Pruitt has been at Trusada for 3.5 years, I guess. She and I joined roughly the same time. And Nancy started out as a data engineer and has moved up the ranks to where now she's managing multiple data implementation teams, multiple teams of data engineers. Sagar joined us, I think, a year and a half ago, something like that. Yeah. And some of you may know him. He graduated from UNCC with a master's in computer science and has also made a very important impact on Trusada and for Trusada, and has done a lot of work in both in data engineering and also on the product side. So all three of us contribute in very different ways to Trusada, but one of the things that is common to all of us is this idea of feedback, both giving and receiving feedback. It's common to really any kind of work situation, and that's really what we want to go into in depth today. So if you'll give me a second, I'm going to share my screen. We have a PowerPoint that we're going to go through today and give you all some insights. As we go through that, if you have questions or things you want to talk in more detail about, please either unmute and speak up or put a note in the chat. And Nancy and Sagar, if you all can monitor that, and if I get going speaking too much, please interrupt me and we can stop and talk about whatever point somebody in the room wants to go through. Jill, feel free to do that also. So if you all will bear with me for 1 second, I'm going to share my screen and pull up the slide deck. All right. Can you all see this?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, as you can see, today's topic is about giving and receiving feedback. We're going to go through several different steps. The first several sections are really us talking about our experiences and our thoughts about feedback. First of all, we're going to try to give you an idea from our perspective, what are the main points about feedback that are most important. Then we're going to talk a bit about giving feedback, and then we'll shift to receiving feedback. Then we want to give you some examples of what we view as good feedback. And then we're going to actually split up into in groups and breakout rooms and go through some role play where we're going to be each of us are going to be in one of the rooms, and we're going to lead you all through some scenarios where you all actually get some experience yourself in either giving feedback or receiving feedback. Because one of the things I think that makes these sessions interesting, we want to provide content to you that's relevant, but it's also good for you all to practice and experience doing some of the things that we talked about in the presentation. So first of all, what is feedback? Feedback can be a range of things, but I think at its core, it's these first 3 points. It's trying to listen to whoever is providing the feedback, and then taking time to, let me back up. It's really listening on both sides, because the people giving the feedback, they have to listen to the people that they're working with. And when you're receiving feedback, you really have to think carefully about what the feedback actually means. Then in both situations, both giving and receiving, you really need to be thoughtful about it. Whatever the information is that's being shared, you really need to think through it and synthesize it and pull up the most important points for you. And then the final step is to figure out the best solution. And part of that's improving in performance. Part of that's trying to address and meet and hopefully exceed expectations as well as you can. At Tresata, feedback is one of the core parts of how we work with our employees, and it also is a big thing for the company, because if our employees do well, if they can actually invest in their career, the company does better. And feedback is a big part of that investment. Our experience is that this may be surprising, but it's actually harder to, it's easier to receive feedback than to give it. And we're going to talk a little bit about the challenges in giving feedback, and how for feedback to be effective, you really have to think through what that content is and what is the best situation for providing that. And again, at the end of our discussion today, we're going to go through some role playing in breakout rooms and give you all some experience to actually receive and give feedback. As I mentioned before, feedback is really important. It helps the individual employee develop, grow, become more effective. I think I would argue that if an employee gets effective feedback and is able to grow in response to feedback, that's going to make them more successful and arguably happier. It's not your success in your workplace is not the only thing that determines your overall level of happiness. But if you're doing well in work and you're succeeding, then I think you're going to end up doing feeling more positive about yourself and your work. Feedback can help you focus your work and achieve better results, because you know better what you really need to focus on. And feedback, I think, also improves communication in general between the manager and the employee. That sometimes is a type of communication that can be stifled for a number of ways, and feedback is one way to sort of open up those communication channels and make them work more effectively. Whoops. Here are some general qualities of feedback that that you will see in more detail as we go through the rest of the presentation. You want it to be constructive. You don't want to just get angry at somebody because they're doing a bad job and give them and start tearing them apart as a person. That is totally non-constructive. You want to help somebody grow and do better. Another part of this is trying to be more specific in the feedback you give. Telling somebody, "Oh, you're great." That didn't really help anybody improve what they're doing. You really have to be as specific as you can. In a lot of situations, it's good to act immediately on something, to respond immediately with feedback after something happens. Now, this gets a little more complicated when you have to be more thoughtful, or you start to think about how feedback interacts with performance reviews. And that's something we're going to talk about there. Feedback can be helpful if it's actually tied to the employee's goals. Hopefully, most of us in most situations are going to have some overall goals that we're working on through the whole year. And ideally, feedback will at least partially focus on how we can actually achieve those goals in very concrete ways. And finally, you want to make sure that feedback is timely. Part of that is making sure that you provide feedback immediately. But another part of that is choosing when you actually either request or provide that feedback. And that takes us to this decision about giving, this whole process and thoughts about giving feedback. This is the second part of our presentation. I'd argue that there are 3 different types of feedback. And as you'll see, different types of feedback are appropriate in different situations. One of the easiest types of feedback to give somebody is appreciation. You really appreciate what somebody did because they did it well. It's gratitude and approval. It's more of an emotional response, but you would like to have it grounded in specific things that somebody did well. It's amazing how effective and important positive feedback can be. Just to tell somebody they did a good job, that can be very empowering and motivating, and it can really boost somebody's confidence. The second type of feedback that's relevant is advice. And this is more specific about how you can grow and improve in the future. It can still be based on specific behavior. Sometimes it's things to change. You want to try, based on a particular situation, you want to try to do differently in that situation. Or maybe there was some kernel of greatness in how somebody reacted or changed, and you want that employee to continue doing that, repeating that. Can be another piece of advice. This is arguably less emotional and focused really on individual people's performance. It's not about the person, it's about the specific things they're doing. The final type of feedback is that we're going to talk about is evaluation. And this is evaluating people in a specific situation, a specific moment. Sometimes you compare them against their set of standards or their goals. Sometimes you compare them to other people. Oftentimes this takes place in performance reviews. And this in most companies, performance or reviews are designed to evaluate employees' performance. Ideally, everybody in the company gets some sort of evaluation, even the CEO. Sometimes the board of a company, they're the ones who end up evaluating the CEO, and the CEO evaluates the C-suite, and then on down like that. Everybody needs some type of evaluation to basically tell them how they're doing and to provide some motivation. Now we have these three types of feedback, and I would argue that you want to use different types of feedback at different times. And specifically, I think it's more effective to try to separate the appreciation and advice from evaluation. Now, what does this mean? We talked earlier about feedback being more impactful if you give that feedback in a very timely way. That has to do, I think, more often with the day-to-day occurrences of somebody did a great job on a presentation, or somebody really turned out a really fine product, and you tell them right after it happened that they did really well. That's one way to separate the appreciation advice from the evaluation. If the evaluation ends up taking place more in performance reviews, that allows people to really process the appreciation and advice without this sort of uber thought going on in their head. How am I doing? Evaluation tends to crowd out everything else in somebody's head. How did I do this year? How did I do this quarter? If you're having that evaluation, that can push out or devalue in somebody's mind any positive thoughts you give, any advice you give about improving. So that's one of the reasons why providing appreciation advice in a separate venue from evaluation can help that appreciation advice actually have more impact and help somebody improve better in how they perform. And these last points here are sort of more specific examples of what I'm talking about. If you really want to try to motivate somebody, as I said before, appreciation can be very, very effective there. But you can't really make it up. It really has to be authentic. If you didn't think somebody did well on a particular project, don't try to convince them don't try to tell them and convince them that they did well. You have to be authentic in your appreciation. And again, you want to focus on the individual, because that's a great way to motivate somebody. The advice comes in when you're trying to help somebody change and improve their performance. Again, it's better to be specific and focus on specific tasks. You want to help them, you want to work with them, I should say, to find a better way of doing something. You don't want to be right. Sometimes the manager's ego gets in the way. I think this is the best way to do it because I am the manager and we have to do it my way. That's not a great way to give advice. You may have your own thoughts about how to give advice, but if you can talk about the situation with the employee and work together to figure out a better way to do a particular task, they're going to be more likely to improve their performance. You want to address what worked well and also what could be done differently. That's sort of a little bit more of the appreciation and things they should repeat, but also addressing things that they really need to try to change. And then finally, evaluation. As I said, this is a good thing to do during performance reviews. When you're doing them in performance reviews, ideally, you don't want to have the employee surprised. If all the feedback you've been giving to the employee in terms of advice about improving performance, if all the feedback they've been getting, or most of it through the entire year, has been very positive and sort of affirming, and then when they get to the performance review and they get a very negative performance review, that's going to be a huge shock to the system. Ideally, when they get to the performance review and their evaluation, many of the things that you've been talking about up to that point should support whatever evaluation you get to in the performance review. That makes the performance review more effective, but also it's not going to be as shocking to somebody. Because if somebody hasn't been doing well over the course of the year, you should be giving them feedback about how they really need to try to do better over the course of the year. So when you give them that evaluation during the performance review, it should not be a surprise. So I think that's a really big part of the evaluation. You need to set the stage for whatever evaluation it is, positive or negative, over the course of the entire year, so that when you get to the performance review, it's not a surprise. The last point I want to make here actually builds on a specific part of giving feedback, and that's the difference between coaching and reprimanding. The first bullet here gives a definition of a reprimand: a severe reproof or rebuke, especially a formal one, by a person in authority. Nobody likes to get a rebuke or a reprimand. Arguably, I don't like to give them because it's very negative, and you don't want to tear down your employees. You want to affirm them, but sometimes people need to change what they're doing, and sometimes they need direction about how they can improve. So how can we keep it in that coaching camp where you're trying to help somebody improve and try to stay away from the reprimand of you're doing a poor job and you really need to improve that? It really keeps somebody from moving to that, keep your employee from moving into that very dangerous negative zone. Well, I think a big part of this for me is to try to formalize things. And by formalize, I mean to state explicitly, and then afterwards to write down some of these things and make sure you and the employee you're managing are on the same page. And no better way to do that than writing it down and make sure everybody agreed to it. There are 3 things you need to try to do formally. And again, write down. When you're engaged with somebody in a coaching session where they really need to improve, specify exactly what your expectations are. Exactly what do they need to do better in a situation. And again, it can't be, oh, just do this better. You got to go into detail and specifics to explain exactly what they need to do in that situation. The second piece is to talk about the impact. What is the employee going to face if they change what they're doing and start meeting expectations better? And what is the employee going to face if they don't change their behavior and don't meet these expectations that you've just laid out? Those 2 things are really important for giving advice in a coaching session, so that the employee knows exactly what they need to do and it's written down. Okay, those are the first 2 things in terms of giving advice. But as you work with the employee, one of the things you can do that you really need to do actually is follow up. Don't just give the employee advice in a coaching session and write down the expectations and impact and then just leave it there. Because if you do, the employee is going to take the signal, well, they said that, but it's not really that important. But if you follow up 2 weeks later and have a specific meeting with the employee and say, okay, how are you doing about meeting these expectations? And after that meeting, you actually write down how they're doing and share that with the employee. That follow-up, particularly if it's repeated, is going to be a whole lot more effective in motivating and encouraging the employee to respond effectively to the advice that you're trying to give them. So if you don't do any of these things, the employee probably is going to be less likely to change, and you're going to end up more likely in this reprimanding situation where it's a very negative situation in your employee, and you come closer to either the employee leaving or you having to force the employee to leave. Nobody wants to get to that situation. A much better outcome is if you formalize the expectations, the impact, and the follow-up, so the employee has a much clearer idea of what they need to do and clear motivation to try to actually do those things, to change their behavior and start meeting the expectations more effectively. Okay, that really wraps up all the points I wanted to make about giving feedback. Now we're going to move on to receiving feedback. And for this, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Nancy, and she's going to take us through some useful tips about receiving feedback. Go ahead, Nancy.
Thanks, Pat. Okay, so like Pat said, we're going to talk a little bit about the best way to approach receiving feedback. This can be a little bit touchy. It can be really hard to respond appropriately or just kind of accept when you might get some tough feedback. And it's also sometimes tough to actually gain anything or act on even positive feedback. So there's a couple of things that you can make sure that you do and just think of every time that you find yourself in any kind of situation involving receiving feedback, whether it's like Pat was saying, something a little bit more ad hoc, like the appreciation or advice, or in a more formal setting, you can be more prepared for it in that kind of evaluation. So the first thing to think about is timing. We talked about this in terms of giving feedback, but it's also true in terms of receiving feedback. Oftentimes you might find yourself in a situation where you're requesting feedback, but you're going to want to make sure that it's a good time for the person that is going to be giving you the feedback and for yourself. So just thinking about those things and making sure that you've sort of set yourself up for success there. Focus on the facts. So this one's really important because when you're talking with somebody who's giving you feedback, you might find yourself inclined to argue or get defensive, which is just never good in general, but also tends to go in talk more in terms of feelings or that kind of situation, which is not really going to be productive here. You want to think about facts. If you're told that you're late too often, and you don't think that that's fair, you could point out that you were on time every day this month, except for one day. That kind of situation. Clarify the criticism or any question. That's also really important because if you don't really understand the feedback that you're getting, you certainly can't act on it. It'll also reassure the person that's giving you the feedback that you're hearing it and that you're thinking about it, which is going to make them more confident that you're working on improving. So restating what was said to you to make sure that the person agrees with the way that you're interpreting it. And if you don't understand, asking questions and being gracious. It's hard to get feedback, but it's also really hard to give it. And the person that's giving you the feedback is doing it because they want you to improve and they want to help you improve. It would be far worse if they thought these things but didn't tell you. So just thinking about that and reminding yourself to be gracious in all situations, even if you aren't particularly feeling that way in the moment. And then putting it into action. It's not really helpful to get feedback if you don't do anything about it. So make a plan, figure out the best way to improve, work with the person that's giving you the feedback to make sure that this is a good idea and that it's going to help address the situations that this person has brought up to you.
Nancy, if I can chime in on there 1 second. What Nancy just said about developing a plan to respond to the feedback, I think that's sort of the flip side of what I was talking about before with the manager trying to formalize the feedback and write it down. You can, as an employee, you can take the initiative to figure out this plan, share it with your manager, and then update your manager about how you're doing on that. And that can be a really, really effective way to show that you're actually responding to and actually taking advantage and putting into action the feedback.
It also brings us back to focusing on facts, which allows you to sort of have data proof that you are addressing the situation that was brought up and that you are improving.
Okay.
All right, just sort of a continuation here. Own your experience. You shouldn't try to lie about how something went for you. You should be really honest. You should be honest about how certain situations affected you and not try to sugarcoat things or anything like that. And then don't argue with others' feelings. It sort of goes back to what I was saying earlier, where when you're bringing up an argument, should focus on the facts. But if somebody else brings up their feelings, you can't argue with them. That's part of the reason why they're not really a good way to handle the situation. But if the other person is bringing up feelings, you can't argue with that. You can't say that it's not true that someone felt a certain way or that something made them feel a certain way. You just have to accept that. So trying to argue that it was wrong for someone to feel a certain way is just never going to work. That's why you have to bring everything back to the facts. Asking clarifying questions. We already covered this mostly, but just really make sure that you understand the feedback that was given. Because again, it doesn't do anything if you don't really understand it. Something else that I want to point out here is sometimes in the moment, you're not in a position to do this all right. So if you have to focus on, one thing, it's being gracious in the moment. Make sure that you stay being gracious and that you're, kind to the person that's giving you this feedback and that you're receptive to it. Sometimes it can really affect you to receive criticism or negative feedback. And if you know that you are in a situation to ask these clarifying questions in the moment and all of this, then you should walk away, take a better time and follow up. And in that time, you should be really prepared to, if it's in writing, you should have everything written out that you need to clarify. And if it's in person, you should pick a time that's really going to work for everyone to make sure that you can fix the issues that you were having in the previous situation and actually be in a good headspace to address these issues. So rephrase the feedback to acknowledge it. Again, whether that's in the moment, in writing in a follow-up, or in a follow-up session, making sure that when you rephrase it back to the other person, they agree with the way that you understand it, and you're not just parroting their words back at them, because then maybe you don't understand exactly what they're saying. Always thank the other person for feedback. This might feel a little bit counterintuitive, but at the end of the day, it is to help you. So there's another way of saying that you should be gracious. Recognize that this person took time to think about these things and give you this feedback, and that it's not easy for them. So it'll go a long way to recognize that. And then reflect on your own behavior leading to the feedback. This one might feel a little bit obvious, but a lot of people, when they receive criticism or negative feedback, are inclined to get defensive immediately and never actually get to the point of thinking, could I have actually done something better? What did I actually do that led to these people having this response? And what could I address to not repeat this in the future?
All right.
Great. Bye, Pat.
All right.
And the Trusada slant. So this is the way that we approach feedback at Trusada. We give continuous feedback, like Pat was saying, in terms of advice and appreciation, always giving feedback in a timely manner, so that if there is a response to a specific situation, it's addressed quickly. But we also have formal performance reviews 2 times a year. They're employee driven, meaning that the employee we have like a more formal process, but there is an employee self-evaluation component in addition to a manager evaluation component, which leads to more interesting conversations in the moment. So we have formal performance reviews 2 times a year, and then we also have battlefield promotions, which is a situation where it might not be someone's formal review, but they've done something really well, they're ready for a new challenge. They receive a promotion outside of the normal review cycle, and a review and usually positive feedback in this case is part of that.
All right. Thank you, Nancy. That's a great summary of a lot of pieces around receiving and receiving feedback. Next, as I mentioned, we're going to switch to some specific examples of positive feedback, just so you have an idea of what that content can look like. And Sagar is going to take us through some of those examples.
Thanks,
Go ahead, Sagar.
Thanks, Pat. So here we are with some of the positive examples, and we are going to think through as why these feedbacks are positive, what makes them positive. So we are going to go through each and every feedback and analyze it in a very scientific and objective manner. So here is the first feedback. I saw that you learned how to use pivot tables for your Excel project, and it really helped display the data. Sorry, I can't see the entire screen, but okay.
Here we go.
Though that wasn't in your job description, it shows that you are a great learner and hungry to do your best job possible. Now, if you think through this, the action is kind of specified very, very clearly as to why a person is being given a feedback, that he had learned how to use pivot tables in the Excel project. Now there is an element of grace in the in the entire feedback that the employer is very, very grateful for what that person has done. And there is an expression of emotion as well. In the last sentence where he says that you are a great learner and hungry to do best. So that clearly shows that the manager wants that person to continue doing this activity and improve and not forget about it. If you go to the second example, it says, I know this goal wasn't easy. How you managed to set it and systematically work towards it until you achieved it truly speaks of your intelligence, tenacity, and perseverance. I'm lucky to have you on my team. Now, this is a perfect example of a very good feedback where there is an emotional connection that's being set between your manager and the employee, and uh, a certain level of confidence is being built up when someone says that I'm lucky to have you in my team. And that's really, really encouraging to someone when someone is kind of thinking about, am I doing well, am I kind of, is something wrong that's been going on. So these kind of words and these kinds of conversation really boost employee confidence, and they really they really they really try to achieve what they want to achieve. uh, the third example, the way you gave that presentation today finally really shows me you listened to what I said about the snafu last month. Appreciate your mindful application of feedback. Now this feedback clearly shows that the manager has been has been under constant touch with the employee, and he has been in this constant evaluation mode where the manager wanted that person to grow, and he has taken specific effort to follow up on the progress, at least since last month. So this forms an this clearly shows that there has been evaluations and advices that has been given to the employee, which led to this feedback. uh, Moving on to the next one, I know you put tons of extra hours into this project, and I think I would know even if I didn't see you staying late. This is absolutely outstanding work. Now, it is really important to acknowledge someone's hard work, uh, and the way that person has acknowledged someone's hard work is kind of expressing the thought that he definitely knows that you stay late. So that brings in that element of authenticity into his feedback, which is really, really important when someone is kind of trying to give you an appreciation. It should feel authentic. It should not feel like maybe he didn't mean it. So the fourth feedback is the perfect example of being authentic in one's feedback. Fifth, your emails have gotten so much more clear recently. I know you have been working on that, and I see the fruits of your labors. Uh, Again, we can clearly see that the manager has set clear expectations for the employee. They have told that in the past they might have told them that your emails have they're a little ambiguous, so try to work on it. Probably they might have worked together to know the steps as to how do I improve it. And there has been a constant follow-up mechanism between manager and the employee that was there, which would have led to this feedback. And we can clearly see that the manager is appreciating for the effort that the employee has done over the past few months. So yeah, that's about it. um, it should be very in short, it should be very subtle, it should be authentic, it should be genuine, and the whole idea should be about, it should feel like organic when you try to give a feedback to someone.
Sagar, thank you. That was really interesting breakdown of these different examples, and particularly, I think they illustrate a lot of the themes that Nancy and I have already brought up earlier. And it's just what we're trying to do here is give concrete examples of some of the things that some of the ways that you can apply the ideas that we talked about before, Next, we're going to give you all the opportunity to do the same thing, to apply some of these principles in role playing. Now, I think the next step is we're going to be split into breakout rooms for about 15 minutes. So the idea is we're going to go into breakout rooms. Nancy, Sagar, and I, each of us are going to be in one of the breakout rooms. And then we're going to walk you all through some role-playing scenarios where you all are either going to practice giving feedback or practice receiving feedback. And we're also going to ask you to do each of those things in a very poor way. So you can give really poor feedback in a situation, but also try to do it in a way that actually is delivered in a good way. So that you get to practice doing it well and doing it poorly. And that's really what we want to try to do. So you can start thinking about how some of these ideas really can be a part of what you're doing when you're either giving or receiving feedback. So that's what we're going to do for about 15 minutes. And after that, we're going to come back together, share insights from the role playing, and then we're going to open the floor to questions from you all. That's sort of where we're going for the rest of the discussion today. Okay, what I would like to do next is hear a bit from our new friends at UNCC about what you thought about these breakout sessions. And I'll frame that a little more specifically. What did you find difficult about these sessions? Anybody want to share your thoughts?
Hi, my name is Megha, a student at UNCC.
Great.
So most difficult, rather than difficult, the situations which were given were actually real-time scenarios itself. Those situations do happen on an everyday basis at the company. So facing that is actually kind of difficult when it comes to the situations, but it was really helpful knowing like how we could have handled it from both the employers and employee side of view.
Yeah, I think everybody in this room at some point is going to be in both of those roles. Oh, not at the same time, but in both of those roles. So that's one of the reasons why we wanted to try to make sure we cover both those roles and actually give you all some experience in what's hopefully a very safe environment to try out responding to one challenge or another challenge. So that's great. I'm glad that was very glad it was useful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, Syed, how about you?
Yeah, so for me, it was like this experience, or like even in the previous giving or receiving feedback, it's quite a difficult job because you have to be empathetic alongside trying to achieve something out of it. Because you obviously, like, if you are giving feedback, you can you should be like aware of the fact that you shouldn't get personal to that employee, and you should maintain those boundaries between like based on your position in that specific space. So alongside that, you have to also achieve the goal of the by actually getting the worth out of it. Because if you are giving feedback, you are giving it with the purpose of like that employee or your colleague or anyone out there should like receive it and also like construct out something of that. You are encouraging self-reflection. So it's a two-way process. How you signal out how that person receives and how that person reflects back in form of work or the change of behavior or anything. So I feel like it's a complex sort of a scenario in which you get involving humans, because we humans are never simple people, right? So it can go any way. You can like encourage that specific employee, or you can even discourage for that employee to resign the end of the month because he just got very much pissed or he got offended. You might have like triggered something. So for me, I think it's like a timely thing which you learn with time to time and start dealing with different sort of people coming from different backgrounds. It's not an overday thing. It comes with experience. So, but yeah, it's always good to practice it, and because it's very rare. Like I have never been to such session where we practice giving and receiving feedback. It's always like you get into the situation and now you have to give the feedback without any knowledge or anything. So yeah.
Good. And I think you're totally right about the how complicated human interaction can be, particularly in this context. And I think one of the things that I don't know if the other breakout groups got to the fifth scenario. We didn't come anywhere close, but the fifth scenario again was about cultural differences, particularly from a language standpoint. If the manager and employee have different languages as their sort of first learned or their native language, and one has learned the other language, that adds a whole nother level of complexity. And I think both sides just have to work through it and be patient with the other to try to really understand what they mean in that context. And I think we could probably devote an entire another session to those kinds of cross-cultural challenges. This is something we're increasingly dealing with at Tresata. We are opening an office in India, and we have a number of employees who are based in India, and we're having to deal with everything from time zones to all the different festivals and celebrations they have in India, and just and it's different from the U.S. And it's no better or worse, but if we can integrate those, it makes for a much more productive work environment. But you really do have to work at it. Syed, you're very much right about that. Let's see, we have another question or comment from Yash. Go ahead, Yash.
Yeah, so I thought it was an eye-opening experience, kind of seeing both parts of it, giving the bad and the good feedback. I mean, kind of giving or not giving, receiving it, and kind of giving a response, because that was kind of eye-opening, kind of saying it out loud, like the negative part. And it's like, oh, now I see how this sounds. And so this is like kind of a good way to kind of phrase it and kind of put it in more of a positive spin and more of like, I'm understanding what I'm doing wrong, whereas I'm just arguing out on this side.
Yeah, it's funny that there's an emotional component to this. When you actually see hear the negative comments coming out of your own mouth. I mean, that's, we don't hopefully we don't have to do that on a regular basis. And it's not like you necessarily have to enjoy doing it. But if you understand the importance of doing it and why you're trying to help the employee develop and grow, and if we never get any negative feedback, if it's all positive, then we aren't going to grow as much. So for me, that really helps in terms of trying to make sure that when I won't say negative feedback, I'll say constructive feedback. When that's merited, I think it's really, really important to try to provide it, because if you don't, you aren't really doing your job as a manager or trying to help the employee develop as much as you could. And that's important for the overall organization too. Any other thoughts or comments about the breakout sessions? Okay, why don't we shift gears, and for our last little bit here, we can, Nancy, Sagar, and I are very happy to answer questions you all have about anything we talked about today. And probably, I mean, if you're really curious, we could also talk a little bit about Trusada, but that's not really the focus of the conversation today, so I don't want to steer us there necessarily. So any questions or other topics you all want to try to go through today?
I have one question. Like when we are receiving feedback and suppose it's not our fault, and how to not being defensive and try to explain our point of view, like we are not wrong in that particular situation.
So you're saying that you're saying that the feedback is actually inaccurate, but that's what your manager tells you, and you're asking, what do you do in that situation?
Yeah, like some part of the feedback is not right and some part is right. So
yes, that's even harder. There's some that is accurate and some that's inaccurate. Nancy and Sagar, do you want to take a crack at that, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I can take a stab at it. I think the only solution in that regard is ask clarifying questions and kind of back it up with proof if you have. Like, if you could have some kind of a proof that okay, maybe you are whatever you are saying is a little off, and so yeah, I mean, just have a conversation. Maybe at the right time. It might not be a right time to just ask on the spot, but think through it, decide your case.
Okay. So maybe we can speak after some time, after he gives us the feedback, like go later on and clarify
definitely.
our point of view.
You can just acknowledge that, okay, I will think through it. I do acknowledge that, okay, there is some problem, there's some mismatch in the expectations, and I want to grow. Just assure that person that I want to grow. So I will think through it. I think there are some elements, the aspects that you have said, they seem to be a little off, but I can discuss it at a later time. And yeah, I mean, strike out a conversation.
I think something to keep in mind is that the actual feedback might not be the actual important part might not be the thing that your manager says you did, but the fact that they perceived it a certain way. So, like, if the feedback is that you're late and you're looking back and you're saying, but I wasn't late, you can acknowledge that the problem is that maybe you didn't like check in with your manager first thing in the morning like you're supposed to. Reset that kind of expectation. So you have to think about that, like, okay, even if this thing didn't happen that they think happened, why do they think that it happened? Because the problem is that they perceived it a certain way. And you can work with them to make sure that that kind of miscommunication doesn't happen in the future without telling them that they're wrong or lying about something. Say, oh, I think you saw it this way. My apologies. This is what happened, but I'll make sure to do X, Y, Z in the future to make sure that we're aligned.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
And definitely you should avoid overthinking, because in such situation, when you are given a negative feedback, we tend to overthink and, you know, chart out all the scenarios. So have the right kind of thinking, and, you know, before, and you should have that control over yourself that, okay, now you're overthinking, just clarify it with your manager. That's it.
Yeah,
most important thing is to never just disagree and never just say that they're wrong, or just throw, as much as we say to put facts out there, it should never just be, here's the fact, so see you're wrong. It should be, oh, this is what happened, but this is how you interpreted it, so let's try to bring them together. Should always have that sort of slant of, I understand where you are coming from.
Yeah.
And always have that leeway of, okay, you could be wrong. You could be wrong. It's like, or even if you feel like you are right, you could be wrong.
Yeah. Yes. Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashad. But also, there's a great question, but Nancy and Sagar, those are very thoughtful responses. Other questions, other things you all would like to talk through.
Yeah, so I had a question about, I've always heard about giving feedback in like the sandwich method. I don't know if that's the technical term for it, but the positive, then the critical, then the positive. Is that like an appropriate kind of method of giving feedback, or do you think it's not as effective as other ways?
Nancy and Sagar?
I think it's not appropriate because you're missing the whole point. Yeah, you know, it should be clear that what you need from that person. And I feel like it's kind of avoiding, you know, that difficult conversation. It's a way of avoiding that difficult conversation, and you will have to have that conversation some point of time. So it's better to, you know, start it early, the first time you notice it, and you know, just avoid some surprises to that person.
I think I agree with Sagar, but I think you could probably do something like that if you then just highlight the points, all the points you made at the end very clearly and concisely. Like you could start with positive, do something constructive, and then do something positive, as long as the very last thing you do is say, okay, so to recap, did this well, let's work on this, and you did this well. We did talk in our breakout room a lot about how people will completely forget all the positive feedback that they received and just focus on the negative feedback and act like they had a really bad review when maybe they had 5 good things listed about them, but they weren't discussed as in depth. And then there was the one thing that they just were completely worked up about. Like, I've definitely responded to things that way. It's just how people are. So I think that's probably where the sandwich method comes from, is making sure that people remember that they have done some things positively, that you're not just giving them a terrible review and that they're not just, you know, doing everything poorly, that you do see the good things that they're doing. Making sure that people remember that is important. But I also agree with what Sagar said, which is you have to make sure they remember the things that they need to work on.
Yeah, that's the danger with the sandwich method, that if you put you can have the difficult conversation, but if you put it in the middle and you don't devote enough time to it, people may not pay as much attention to it. And now, as Nancy said, following that up with, okay, these are the action points going forward. And again, going back to the coaching versus reprimand slide. Actually, if it's something, you know, Sagar was laying out this sort of desperate scenario where the person really needs some strong correction to their work and behavior. If you're at that point, writing it down, what are the expectations? What is the impact if you follow the expectations or don't follow the expectations? And then spelling out when you're going to follow up. Those can be some of the concrete action steps that the employee needs to do right after you give them the feedback. And that's another way to, you can have the sandwich method and use the positives to try to cushion some of the negative, but you can't let the employee lose sight of what they have to do, because if they do, they're not going to improve their performance, and that's a bad outcome for everybody. Other questions? Any other questions from anyone in the room?
Pat, I think it would be great if you tell our students a little bit about Trusada.
Okay, sure. Gosh, Trusada is an intelligence software company based here in Charlotte. We started here in Charlotte. Now we have teams working in New York City, where Nancy is, also in London, and also in India. We're gonna, I think in January, we're currently scheduled to open our office in Bangalore, and we have probably, I think, 4, 5, 6, something like that, employees spread out working remotely, and they'll come together in the office in Bangalore. So what do? We help companies manage and monetize their data. And what does that mean? Most companies, most organizations, even UNCC they have problems managing their data. You think about all the different data warehouses and all the different servers where all the data is located. What we do is help companies bring that data together into a unified data asset, and we integrate all the different types of data, and then we help companies find insight in that data. And the companies can find those insights through dashboards and visualizations. We create apps, we do predictive analytics. All these pieces help us help our customers, but we would argue provide hyper-personalization of service to their customers at absolute scale. We use distributed processing and Hadoop to manage incredibly huge amounts of data, and we automate the whole process. From the whole data analytics process, we automate so that the data, our client's data flows into our software, and at the other end, automatically comes all the intelligence insights, the dashboards, the predictive analytics, all those kinds of things. Our companies are Fortune 500 companies. We have verticals in, I guess, things, which is like our retail and travel and things like that, but also in finance and in the healthcare industry. Our core value is enrich life. We try to have a positive impact on our clients' lives, our own employees' lives, and the broader community. And that last piece is part of why we are actually in this conversation today. We try to share our insights and experiences with people out in the community, and we really appreciate this opportunity to participate and support the A2i program, because I think it's a really good thing for graduate students at UNCC to be able to talk with people that are going through some of the things that the graduate students eventually are going to be involved with, you know, working in a professional environment. How's that, Jill?
That was great. Thank you.
Nancy and Sagar, do you any points you all want to add to that summary?
No, I'm good. Thanks.
I
Pat.
think you covered it, Pat.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Gold star.
Gold star. Awesome. Woo! I get one too. Yeah. So if you're curious about other parts of Trusada, jobs we're posting, all those kinds of things, please go to trusada.com. That's our website that has all the various details. And if you have further questions, please feel free to reach out to us at Trusada. If you're from a job standpoint or application standpoint, the best way to reach us is recruiting@trusada.com. That's a shared email. I follow it, several other people follow it, and we try to answer whatever questions people have. The best way to apply for jobs is actually through the careers page on our website. That lists all the positions that we currently have available at Trusada. Thank you, Jill, for that opportunity.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Pat, Nancy, Sagar, for coming today and sharing these insights with us, and to the students for attending as well. It's such an important topic. And I think you all as graduate students are exactly on both ends of this. You're receiving feedback that can be hard to get, and you're needing to give it, or if not now, in the very near future. So I'm glad that you're working on this skill. Keep working on it, and thanks for being here, Tresata team.
It's our pleasure, and we hope we can do it again soon.
Me too. Have a great weekend and keep learning and growing, grad students.
All right, thank you all. Have a good
Thank
week.
You all.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a nice weekend. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.